Welcome back, denizens of the night, to V Rising. The first big content update, the Secrets of Gloomrot, is finally out. It was more than just adding a new zone. Several improvements were also made to the game. Let's go over everything you can expect with this new patch. The first is how castle territories work. You used to have to build a castle hard, then expand outward by building foundations and walls. Now once you place a castle heart, the entire territory is yours. The map will help show how big your territory is, or how big another territory will be if you were to capture it. The floors and walls still need to be connected, but any other structure can be placed wherever you want in your territory. Next up, you'll notice that the blood altar was removed. Now you can access the blood menu at any time by pressing the K key or opening it up from the menu on the right. You'll notice that the blood menu has gotten a substantial redesign. It's not just the art style, but you're also given several clues as to the direction and distance where a V-Blood carrier is located. Another new feature with all V-Bloods is that they now drop health orbs when they hit 50% and enter their second phase. This is a nice boost, especially for single-player games. Another improvement to blood tracking is that if you track a V-Blood carrier that's been killed recently, you'll now see their ghost and the time left before they respawn. This will be very handy if you plan on farming bosses, and this will be especially helpful on multiplayer servers. V-Blood bosses, especially those level 35 and up, will have a chance to drop a new item called Jewels. Jewels are items that you can socket into your skills to boost their power. Each jewel only sockets into a single skill, and the stats that appear on them will be randomized. Each skill will have their own set of stats that can appear on the jewel, and it's up to you to decide which stats to look out for. To equip a jewel, you can right-click it in your inventory, or you can click the Edit Socket button while viewing the skill. Tier 1 jewels have one stat and cannot be crafted. They can only be found as drops from enemies. Tier 2 jewels have two stats and start dropping at around level 40. But you can start crafting your own after getting the jewel crafting table, which you learn after defeating Raziel the Shepherd. Tier 2 jewels are made out of gems and iron, and if you're looking for a good one, you'll probably have to craft quite a few. Tier 3 jewels start dropping around level 70, and you can craft your own after defeating Merwin the Elementalist in Silverlight Hills. If there's a specific skill you use often, make sure to equip a jewel for it to boost its power. Speaking of rare drops from V-Bloods, there's another kind of item that drops from bosses above level 50. Occasionally, a boss will drop a shattered weapon. This needs to be repaired at an ancestral forge, which is another structure unlocked by defeating Raziel the Shepherd. Both the forge and the shattered weapons require a new material called radium alloy. You'll only be able to craft these after entering Gloomrot South. To better understand when you'll be using reforged weapons, here's what the new progression of weapons now looks like. You start with bone, reinforced bone, then copper, merciless copper, then iron, then merciless iron weapons. After that comes reforged shattered weapons. Not all reforged weapons are the same. They get 2 additional stats that are randomly generated, and that weapon's Q ability will also be infused with the power of one of the 6 spell schools picked randomly. A while after that, we then have dark silver weapons, sanguine weapons, then finally the strongest weapons in the game, which is another set of shattered weapons. These items require another new material called Onyx Tears, a new item you learn to craft after defeating Knight Marshal Styx the Sunderer. You won't be able to craft these until you're close to the end of the game. This patch has not only introduced a new spell category called Storm, but all 6 categories of magic have been redesigned to play better. If you hear the words Leech, Ignite, Condemn, Weaken, Chill, or Static, those are the effects from each spell school. I'd like to give a full analysis of these spell schools in more detail, but that belongs in another video on its own. Let's go over some of the zone changes that this patch introduced, starting with Farbane Woods. The zone itself is practically unchanged. The only new addition is a place called the Shady Merchants Camp, which is close to the Bandit Trapper camp where Keely the Frost Archer roams. You'll no longer find silver coins in Farbane Woods. Now you'll find copper coins, which are much easier to carry. You also don't have to get the human transformation power or track down the wandering merchant anymore. Simply walk up to these shady merchants and start trading.
I interest you in a little something?
They don't seem to care that they're selling to a vampire. As for V-Bloods in this area, they're mostly unchanged. The Alpha Wolf, Errol the Stonebreaker, Keely the Frost Archer, Clive the Firestarter, and the Ferocious Bear are the same as they were before. Rufus's Blood Rage no longer gives a shield, and instead gives a group heal. You can still make it give a shield, you just have to find the right jewel to bring it back. Grayson the Armorer's Crimson Aegis is now an illusion spell, and is now called Phantom Aegis. Instead of a knockback, it applies Weaken to nearby enemies. Goreswine the Ravager's Corpse Explosion was renamed to Bone Explosion. Instead of slowing enemies, it applies Condemn. The Putrid Rat is now easier to spawn. Instead of fishing around and hoping for a Twilight Snapper, now all you need is an Unsullied Heart, which is much easier to come by. Lydia the Chaos Archer now gives you the ability to build a new leatherworking station, which allows you to craft bags. In your character page, you might have noticed 4 new bag slots. Bags give you additional inventory, but only carry specific types of loot. You can make bags that carry gems, research materials, plants, and later on, you'll learn about coin bags. They start off by only giving you 3 extra slots each, but later on, they'll get bigger and can hold up to 7. Pelora the Feywalker no longer gives Veil of Illusion or the Vampire Waygate. She instead gives you a few planting pots. The Vampire Waygate is now unlocked via quests and comes right after the step where you build your stone coffin. Quincy the Bandit King is basically the same, but no longer gives you Chaos Barrier. Nicholas the Fallen's rewards have completely changed. First, he no longer gives you the study to unlock Tier 2 research. He instead gives you the paper press, allowing you to more easily finish off unlocking Tier 1 technology. Secondly, the skill he gives is called Corrupted Skull, and despite using the same icon, it no longer shoots 3 projectiles at once. It's a skill that can store 2 charges, and it fires a single bolt that summons a skeleton if it hits an enemy. For those that have seen my other videos, I'm a huge fan of using Ward of the Damned, which was what Nicholas the Fallen used to give. Personally, I find Corrupted Skull to be just as powerful, if not more. To truly illustrate how powerful it is, let's go kill Tristan with it, the last boss of Farbane Woods.
You probably think you're something, but you're just a kill.
With my old strategy, you had to wait to parry his sword or block his arrows in order to summon skeletons with Ward of the Damned, which are used to distract him. Now, as long as you have good accuracy with Corrupted Skull, you can just keep hitting him with it and fight him completely at range. Corrupted Skull is useful against many bosses, so make sure to try it out often.
Couldn't protect them.
Speaking of Tristan, as the last boss in Farbane Woods, let's talk about his changes. He now gives you Veil of Frost, which used to come from Vincent the Frostbringer. He also gives you a recipe for a new kind of weapon, the Great Sword, giving us another playstyle of combat. Now let's talk about the Dunley Farmlands. This zone has probably had the most work done to it. There's several new places in this map. The mysterious zone in the middle was moved to the north, making room for a new iron cave and the Dunley Farmers Market where you can spend your silver coins. There's a quartz quarry to the northwest, and a place called the Forbidden Tower to the east. The bosses here have undergone some major changes, and 4 new bosses have been added. Firstly, Beatrice the Tailor no longer gives you the human transformation ability. That comes from someone else. As I mentioned before, Vincent the Frostbringer no longer gives Veil of Frost, since that now comes from Tristan. Christina the Sun Priestess's skill has been tweaked slightly. It's still a ground-targeted area healing spell, but instead of an unholy magic called Purgatory, it's blood magic called Blood Fountain. She also used to teach you how to smelt glass, make bottles, and holy resist potions, but now she only teaches you how to make wool thread. There's also our first new boss here, Krigg the Undead General, who may be familiar to some of you once you encounter him. We'll talk about him at another time. Leandra the Shadow Priestess is mostly unchanged. The only difference is that Spectral Assassin has been renamed to Death Knight, and is now an unholy spell instead of illusion. You'll then notice 3 new bosses for this area. I don't want to give too much away, but Grethel the Glassblower will teach you how to smelt glass, Bane the Shadowblade is the one that teaches you how to transform into a human, and Maya the Dark Savant is the one that allows you to finally unlock the study used to unlock Tier 2 technology. Terra the Geomancer is exactly the same, but Meredith the Bright Archer no longer teaches you Sanguine Coil or Wool Thread. She now gives you your first Storm spell, Veil of Storm, and the recipe for Holy Resistance potions, which used to come from Christina the Sun Priestess. Jade the Vampire Hunter no longer gives you a recipe for large explosives. Instead, you get a recipe for another new weapon, pistols. These are pretty good if you want to fight at mid-range of your opponent. Raziel the Shepherd no longer gives you the Athenaeum for Tier 3 technology, or the Silver Resistance potion. Instead, you'll be getting 2 brand new structures, the Jewel Crafting Table and the Ancestral Forge, which I talked about earlier. Octavian the Militia Captain's ultimate has been changed from Mirror Strike to Raging Tempest. It's basically the same ability, but moved from Illusion Magic to the new spell school of Storm Magic. He also no longer gives you the Anvil, the recipe for Dark Silver Ingots, or the ability to craft Tier 3 weapons. Instead, he just unlocks Tier 3 armor and gives you a new recipe for large castle doors. The Hallowed Mountains is practically unchanged. Frostmaw the Mountain Tear and Terrorclaw are almost exactly the same as before, except they now both give you access to medium and large bags respectively. If you want that extra inventory space, you'll have to face the cold. At this point, you'd usually be going to the Cursed Forest, but where you're headed next is finally to the new zone in Gloomrot South, where you'll encounter 3 new V-Bloods. I won't spoil any of the details yet, but Ziva the Engineer is the most important one that unlocks Radium Alloy. Aside from having an electrical steampunk vibe, Gloomrot South also has a lot of mutant creatures. Sucking the blood of these creatures will unlock a new mutant blood type. The mutant blood type gives the following buffs. The speed that this blood drains will be reduced up to 50%, making it last a very long time. It can give up to 25 resistance rating, you can get up to plus 20% movement speed while shapeshifting, and with a 100% quality blood, there's a 40% chance to convert a victim that's been killed with bite into a random mutant monster to help you fight. Monsters aside, the 2 important pieces of loot you'll be finding here are tech scrap and mutant grease. Mutant grease is now one of the 2 ingredients you'll need to make pristine hides. Also, this might not be terribly obvious if you don't read item descriptions, but if you find or make some empty canisters, use them near the toxic lakes to fill them up, like you would with empty bottles near a source of water. Have fun exploring Gloomrot South. We're going to talk about the Cursed Forest next. The Cursed Forest has 2 new bosses, and the geography has been shuffled around a little bit. The Spider Cave is now to the west instead of the north, and the Ancient Village was moved to the east. I need you to warn you about something important. When you enter the Cursed Forest, you will see a new Curse debuff start to rise. When you become more cursed, the map will start to be foggy. At 100, the map and the compass will no longer work. Like the description of the curse says, it's easy to get lost in the mist. It will be difficult to find your way back out, especially with all the roaming creatures ambushing you. You can temporarily remove the curse if you find and release some wisps. Use them wisely, they only last 20 seconds. As a tip, One thing you can still use are map pins. Drop a pin near the entrance to help you find your way back if you get lost. For a more permanent solution, you'll need to find one of the new bosses called the Old Wanderer. He gives you a recipe called the Shroud of the Forest that blocks the curse, something you'll definitely want while navigating this area. As for the other bosses, Ungora the Spider Queen no longer gives you ghost yarn, but instead the recipe for silk, which is important for crafting the tier 3 armor, the Dawnthorn Regalia. Falroth the Soul Taker is unchanged, but no longer gives you the recipe for the new cape that also resists holy and fire damage. That will come later. Wilfred the Werewolf Chief no longer gives the Holy Resistance Flask, but instead gives the Silver Resistance Potion. The Duke of Balaton has more interesting rewards now. Instead of just frog form, he now also gives you a medium coin purse which makes you immune to the debuff from silver coins, and he also teaches you how to make the coins yourself. Matka the Curse Weaver is the same, except she unlocks Ghost Yarn. Ghost Yarn is needed for all the tier 3 armor upgrades, so there's no skipping her this time if you want the best gear. Her Mosquito ability has also been moved from Unholy and into Illusion. Lastly, a new boss here that ends Act 2 is called Cyril the Cursed Smith. This guy will finally teach you how to build the anvil and how to make dark silver ingots, finally allowing you to craft tier 3 weapons. Geographically speaking, the Silverlight Hills is exactly the same. The V-Bloods, however, have changed and 2 new bosses have been added. When you try to leave the Sacred Silver Mine, a new boss, Sir Magnus the Overseer, will be waiting for you. Morian the Stormwing Matriarch is exactly the same as before. Merwin the Elementalist used to give you Imperial Thread, but that item has been removed from the game. She now gives you the recipe for Holy Resistance Flask, and the ability to craft Greater Jewels, which are the 3rd tier of jewels you use to socket into your abilities. There's another new boss that's available at this point, Baron Dubuchon the Sommelier. Look forward to it. Azariel the Sunbringer is mostly unchanged, except he now gives you a recipe for a large coin purse. This will be very good when you want to go trading with lots of coins on hand. Around this point, you'll be exploring the final new zone, Gloomrot North. It doesn't take that long, but you'll quickly realize why it's a bad idea to idle here. Gloomrot North has a never-ending lightning storm that will hurt you if you're not paying attention. On the plus side, it's always cloudy here, so you don't have to worry about the day and night cycles anymore, unless you're flying around as a bat. There's a couple notable locations in Gloomrot North that you'll need to use to make a new item, Charged Batteries. While exploring Gloomrot, you'll come across items called Depleted Batteries. In order to create charged batteries, you'll need to find these lightning harvesters and deposit 10 batteries into them. Be warned, the lightning stations will overload when you do this, making the lightning even worse. In this area, there are 2 new V-Blood bosses. The first is Henry Blackbrew the Doctor. You'll now need to defeat him instead of Raziel the Shepherd to unlock the Athenaeum, in order to unlock all the final tier 3 upgrades. The second boss is Voltatia the Power Master. She's a very difficult fight, but you'll need to defeat her to unlock the last recipes in the game. Lastly, we finish off with 2 familiar remaining V-Bloods. Knight Marshal Styx the Sunderer has a lot more rewards now. Not only does he give the ability to turn into a bat, but you're also given the recipe for an item called Onyx Tears, which is needed for a lot of the endgame gear. You'll also gain a new ability called Soul Burn. It's a short-range area spell that drains enemy health and silences them for a couple seconds. Pretty handy. And lastly, we have Solaris the Immaculate. He's exactly the same as he was before, except he doesn't give you the Soul Shard of Solaris anymore. Speaking of Soul Shards, aren't we missing Gore Crusher and the Winged Horror? After you complete the quest to build the Eye of Twilight, a new tab opens up in the V-Blood menu called Shard Bearers. The eye reveals Gore Crusher and the Winged Horror again, but we have another little surprise. There's a new boss that carries the 3rd Soul Shard, and thus we have a new final boss for the game. You're going to need some heavy upgrades to take on this challenge. And that about sums up the changes in the Secrets of Gloomrot content update. Please look forward to all the new boss guides I'll be making in the future. Until then, Bloodsuckers, good night.